Welcome back to DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast, into a bit more of a busier off-season episode this week, as there's been quite a little bit of news throughout the last week for us to recap. And in this week's episode, we also have Louis Foster joining the show to recap his thermal test, but that will be happening a bit later on. As I said, we've got plenty of news to cover, and as we usually do, we'll have history at the end, and we'll have a little small segment that I made this week. But the major news of the week is in the driver market, where there is now down to 4 seats unconfirmed for the 2025 season, as Ray Robb was confirmed at Juncos Hollinger Racing for the 2025 season. We spoke last week about how his announcement never came through, it was randomly deleted. Whatever happened, he is now signed for Juncos. We know where he will be after a small week of slight confusion, but now we do know where Robb will be his third different team in 3 seasons in an unconfirmed number. We don't know if he'll be in the 77 or the 78 yet, but he will be at Juncos. That's what we do know. Obviously, their other seat remains unconfirmed, and we might briefly touch on it in a minute. But Robb, obviously, we know, brings a nice little budget to Juncos, and they were in the market for drivers with a bit of money to help fund their second seat. So, as we know, Robb has ticked another box, down to 4 to go in the driver market for 2025.
Yeah, I think it's a bit unfortunate when you get to this stage where teams are essentially needing drivers to pay for seats rather than being able to go and hire a Rinus VK or a Linus Lundqvist or, I don't know, a Teo Pourchaire, as they may prefer to do. As we discussed the other week, as Romain Grosjean mentioned in some comments to Racer, costs are just rising so much that this is a necessity for some of these smaller teams, really. And this isn't anything against Ray Robb. He is an absolutely brilliant guy. I love Stingray, and he can be a good driver. I mean, he was runner-up at Indy Next Level, and I guess that does show he's not a slouch. But we've just not seen those signs in his 2 years in IndyCar so far. AJ Foyt Racing made massive strides last year, and Robb was a second-year driver. You were hoping to see probably more progress than you did see. But despite all the progress Foyt made, he finished 11 positions behind teammate Santino Ferrucci in the standings, with almost half the points tally. Any strides forward he did make, I feel, were kind of pretty minimal, really. He managed to crack the top 10 for the first time, but that was only one of 2 top 15 finishes all season long. By contrast, for instance, Santino Ferrucci was in the top 10 11 times. So we need to see another step forward from Robb. I think the fact that he's not stayed with any of his teams probably shows he's not been the finest option in terms of competitiveness early in his IndyCar career. And ultimately, teams have to strike that balance between a program being funded and a program being competitive. But with costs being so high, I feel like that line is just quite blurred. We've seen flashes from Robb, but not quite enough. So again, it's an important year, but I guess as long as he has budget, that's really important for teams.
He's not a driver who deserves a third year based on merit, but we know the importance of this driver market, and Robb's been a big player. Was it going to be Coyne? Was it going to be Juncos Hollinger? There was rumours for a while it might have been Rahal, but it will be Juncos, as we said, and I guess that leads us into the second seat, because Robb was kind of expected in some capacity at somewhere. But this sort of opens up Juncos' options a bit more, because now maybe the second seat can be a paid seat. Then you have, probably in my mind, you have 4 options. You have Connor Daly, after he really impressed in his one-offs last year. Well, I say one-offs is like 5 or 6 races. Romain Grosjean, do you want that continuity there? And then do you go for someone like Rinus VK, or do you go for someone like Linus Lundqvist? So there's, I'll say, the 4 primary options that Juncos would have. And it's a tough balance. I think Grosjean's maybe the most difficult one, because he does have the continuity. And I thought he was okay last season, but he's the one you'd have to pay the most money to, for example, whilst, Lundqvist may come at a cheaper price. Daly may come at a cheaper price. And it's what you want out of it. Is Grosjean a long-term option for a team like Juncos? Maybe not. We know he's got his program with Lamborghini. Does that open the doors for someone like VK or someone like Lundqvist? So this is probably... Well, I guess you still got the Rahal seat still to play for, but this is a key seat in the market, because we know, or we expect, this one isn't going to be too dependent on budget, like, let's say, the Coyne seats, for example.
Yeah, I mean, Grosjean, first of all, I guess the fact that he does already have this other program means that he's not necessarily going to push relentlessly, I guess. Yeah, as you say, he had a good year. They were really quick at points. But it was Daly in the end who stole the limelight with the team's first podium, best results ever. So yeah, I guess we'll see what happens there. Maybe would that be the best for the team, continuity? But then at the same time, maybe Daly makes a lot of sense. And I know a Daly Robb lineup doesn't necessarily look as strong as I don't know, just if you were to say a VK Grosjean lineup in an ideal world or something. But Daly is someone who will also probably bring a little bit of budget. You've seen the backing he's had from Polkadot, for instance, and Daly's extremely marketable. And you know what? At the end of the day, he's probably as good an option in terms of an oval driver, and that doesn't mean as well he's not a decent driver on road and street courses. You know, I think his prior podium that was on a street course, I believe. Was it Detroit? If I'm recalling correctly. But yeah, I mean, I still think Lundqvist and VK are the two standout options on the market. Young have shown a lot of speed. I guess Daly would bring that veteran side with a lot of experience with a lot of different teams, and he just gelled so well with them last season. So I do think that would be a good option. And Grosjean, it's such a tricky situation really with the whole budget situation. You're right, he would probably have to be or demand to be paid the most, and if he has alternative things that he could do, yeah, maybe he is one of the I don't know how to put it into words really, one of the not less attractive options, but maybe less likely options.
What I would say is Daly Robb doesn't come across as ambitious. I still think this could be the most likely, but it doesn't come as ambitious. Well, let's say a VK Robb lineup may be a bit more ambitious. It might not work out, and that's fine. But would you rather have a driver who may take you to the next level, but may not, than a driver who will do okay, but probably won't give you that step you need? I have seen suggestions that Juncos could run a split program. I'd quite like to see maybe Daly on the ovals and maybe Lundqvist on the road courses. That could be an option which maybe is worth considering. I know it's hard for them to say, but something they said they were exploring. Maybe Daly gives you that experience on the ovals, and I guess someone like Lundqvist would want to do a full program, but doing a part-time program is still way better than doing no program at all. So,
or even Grosjean goes back to a part-time program.
Yeah,
he
exactly.
also wants to balance it with his sports car commitments.
Yeah, exactly. So a couple of options there which maybe you could consider, and it's a tough choice. As we said, it looks like almost certainly one of VK or Lundqvist won't have a seat next year unless maybe one of them lands at Coin, which would be surprising. I feel like VK seems like the least favoured option in the entire market at the moment, which is rather quite surprising. You felt like he'd land somewhere, but his chances are low.
I mean, just on that, like you say that, but the two drivers that are kind of out and free, you've got VK. He did test with Coin, and in the recent Indy 500 hybrid test. I guess that was a month or so ago now, wasn't it? And again, I think the fact that Daly tested with JHR in that test is also kind of an indication of his standing in the team. And, I think there was a lot of talk even at the kind of climax of the season that they really, both parties wanted to get that, I don't know, a renewal kind of sorted. Obviously, that was before, it became less and less likely seemingly that Grosjean would return. So, I mean, Lundqvist is the only one out of that lot that doesn't seem to have had some sort of link to another team during the off-season. Again, VK going to Coin from ECR, it's not exactly an upwards move, is it, given kind of the struggles that Coin have had? But if that's the only place he could land, then so be it. Again, we don't know what the situation is at Ray Hall. Obviously, losing Hy-Vee, you'd think they probably need a driver who's probably going to pay for the seat. And ultimately, that's what it's going to fall or come down to for the majority of these remaining seats. It's going to be drivers who can kind of pay their way into them and help to fund these programs.
Who do you go with if you're Ricardo or Brad?
Who would I go with, or who do I think they'll go with?
We can do both.
Okay, I think they'll go with Daly. I think they should go with VK.
Okay. I think they'll go with Daly, but I think they should do a split Daly Lundqvist program. Is what I think they should do. But that's it. As we said, 4 seats to go. We have still got the 2 coin seats. We probably won't know them until probably February. So that will remain completely in the guesswork. We have the Juncos seat and we have a Rahal seat, which is probably, I mean, Fittipaldi, we touched on last week, is seemingly working towards something. So he could be an option.
Just on coin, there has been a report, I think it was from Racer in the last week or so, that Dale Coyne is looking for investment as possibly a sort of co-ownership role. So if they could get something similar to what ECR have done, that could be huge for them in terms of having a free choice.
From Todd Alt, of all people, potentially.
Yeah.
The old ECR Bitnile, or whatever, all the various different weird ECR sponsors are called, which, that could be interesting.
Yeah, that could be another spanner in the works, I guess, and maybe allow more of these kind of more attractive options that don't necessarily have the budget to maybe land somewhere.
Yeah, and then you can have a paid seat. Does that help people like Hunter McElroy, Toby Sowery? Someone like Enzo Fittipaldi could well be in the mix as well there. So again, we probably won't know that until February. We'll obviously know the investment before we do the actual drivers, if there were to be an investment, but that will come with time. And plenty of our seating episodes still to go before that. In sort of the other side of a team, you've got the management, and there's been a big shake-up at Arrow McLaren in the last week as Gavin Ward has left the team. So Ward took over, must have been start of 2020 or midway through the 2022 season. Was under obviously the leadership of Zach Brown, but he led the IndyCar team. So started in 2022. He was an engineer at Team Penske. He'd been very successful at Red Bull Racing and Formula One, and no longer at Arrow McLaren as of this week. I think the announcement was said they parted ways, but I think that's a nice way of saying he got sacked, which is a bit of a shock. I mean, from what the report suggested was that the expectation was for McLaren to win the championship with Pato Ward this year, and Ward has been removed because they failed to meet their objectives, which I found surprising. I think McLaren had a better year, at least in the 5 camp, than they did last year. So that it is a surprise. And I think the biggest thing was, why are McLaren's expectations so high?
Yeah, you're very right. I mean, it was unexpected news because he has been made a really key part of that team. And it wasn't like this happened a long time ago. It's fairly recent that he's been in this kind of elevated role as team principal. And apparently, I mean, there were reports that they'd already had a bit of a reshuffle in roles this off-season. So that, I guess, just makes it a little bit more confusing and a little bit more, I mean, it seems pretty sudden. There was a report from the race that he was on the ground for the Mexican Grand Prix in McLaren colours. So this is clearly something that's happened kind of out of the blue. And it's yet another change out of the blue at a team that's had so many changes of this kind of ilk when you look on the driving side, of course. So I found the dynamic in the Arrow McLaren hierarchy last season quite interesting. They obviously had a lot of decisions to make, or they made a lot of decisions that whether they had to make them or not. And it seemed that Tony Kanaan, as the sporting director, was kind of the major part of those decisions. He was always the guy who seemed to be the face of this stuff and at the forefront, while Ward was maybe a bit more in the background. And in some ways, it seemed like it was Kanaan's team. So with him having that influence, it kind of does beg the question, where was Ward left within that team? And I guess given the influence that TK seems to have as well, does it really mean that not meeting these goals was actually Ward's fault? I'm not sure. So it's quite hard to judge where that team really is. I think they've just been so inconsistent. They've had some really good showings. Look at the Indy 500, how close they keep coming, and the 3 wins for a Ward as well. But there's also been weekends where that team has been slow and they don't seem to know why. And just thinking of like the championship last season as their main goal, it just doesn't feel too realistic. And to be honest, okay, you had the slumps, but it still felt like a positive enough year for the team. The 3 wins for a Ward that's a decent return, and that was all amid this kind of self-inflicted season of such volatility within the driver department. And yeah, okay, they need to make a step forward. And in order to do that, they need stability. Is getting rid of your team principal, who by all accounts really seemed like quite a good leader, the way to do it? Maybe because they had too many voices kind of at the top. But it has felt like they've shot themselves in the foot a few too many times. And I just don't feel like it's really Ward's fault. They need a stable structure, which they seem to now have on the driving side, but also from a hierarchical side. So, yeah, I don't know.
This isn't the first time it's felt like they've jumped the gun on a decision based on very little. It's happened a few times this season. And the ins and outs of that team are bizarre. We had that whole Porsche coming back in Toronto, which I think was the most bizarre of it all, which we were just trying to understand what is going on at this team. And it feels like Kanan's played a really big influence since he's come into the team. It feels like Kanan is the one making the majority of these of these decisions, and that Kanan is the one who probably had more influence than Ward did, at least from the external perspective. And this was a shock. And Zach Brown's comment saying that their quest to become a regular race winner or a championship contender, they feel like a change was needed. And is Ward responsible for that? It's hard to say. I mean, Brown's reasoning was the team's grown. Okay, the team's grown, but he's also said they can't wait until they move into their factory in 2026, I believe it is, or start operating out of it in 2026. So it's really difficult to understand why this decision has really been made. Brown says he still gets on very well with Ward, but you go up to their leadership team now, and there is no real centre point. Is it Kanan now, which seems a bit of a brave decision considering he only stepped away from racing just over a year ago now?
Yeah.
So it's a tough one. And look, are McLaren going to win a title next year? It's possible, but you'd name McLaughlin ahead of O'Ward, you'd name Palou ahead of O'Ward, you'd probably name Herta ahead of O'Ward from 3 different teams. And it seems a bit unrealistic that team who won no races last year had the firm expectation to win the championship this year. It just feels a bit far-fetched.
Everything just feels a little bit messy at the team, whether it's the constant chopping and changing of drivers, of personnel, or this kind of just quite random goals that just don't seem too realistic. And from the outside, it almost feels like Ward has been a bit of a scapegoat in this situation, because to me, he always did seem like a good leader. He seemed like a very personable guy. He was always very kind of hot on creating a really good culture, which is what that team needs, really. Could it be the case that this wasn't a role that suited him the best? I mean, that's possible. His biggest success obviously came as Newgarden's race engineer in 2019 when he won the championship, and that's a different role as a race engineer than it is a team principal. His expertise is kind of said to be on that technical side, and maybe that technical prowess isn't necessarily utilized as a team principal. But he did seem like through, this kind of personable side that it was a role that suited him. But yeah, maybe Zach Brown's kind of noticed other things that have lacked. Obviously, they must have some reason behind the decision, because otherwise it's just completely random. But it is cruel to see another good person, this time a team member, not a driver, suddenly kind of chucked into this uncertainty. It feels like the Porsche situation, where he was just out of the blue, just chucked into the uncertainty after having this. I mean, he was given an assurance he'd be there for the rest of the season. Ward had just been kind of given whatever the new role was in this reshuffle that's been reported a few places. But yeah, I mean, regardless, he seems like the sort of guy that won't be out of a job long, and soon enough, maybe he's going to be threatening Aaron McLaren from the platform of another top team. He's got too good a resume, whether in F1 or IndyCar, to be on the sidelines for too long, you feel. But I just think I agree. It's a strong claim to imply that parting with Gavin Ward is going to take the team to the next level. And it could be something that comes back to bite them. You don't know.
Talking of leaving personnel, Michael Cannon of AJ Foyt Racing, who has sort of almost revitalised that team in many ways in the last couple of seasons, is leaving. We haven't got too much information on it, but I think it'd be a bit of a loss of Foyt because a lot of people are speaking about the influence he's had over the team in the last couple of years, and yeah, he's gone.
Yeah, he's the guy that's really been kind of credited by a lot of people as being the reason behind this major upturn that Foyt have had. He came in, I think it was the start of 2023, as their technical director. And 2023 season, I mean, they weren't going to see a big turnaround in the whole season necessarily, but just look at what happened in the Indy 500. I mean, he'd been a part of Scott Dixon being on pole the 2 years prior in the 500. And the speed that Foyt showed, obviously Ferrucci getting the, well, I say quote unquote podium, not that they really do a podium for the 500, but finishing third. I think Cannon was probably a large reason behind that. There's ultimately no clear reason behind, kind of, or at least reported as to why this has happened, whether he got a better offer. He's not young either. I think Larry Foyt was quoted by Racer saying that he did try and get Cannon to continue for many more years. So evidently something's happened. But kind of just focusing 2024 in particular, I mean, the Penske Alliance obviously helped Foyt quite a lot, but I think also Cannon's genius is a part of why they've had that upturn as well. Maybe the team's at a point now where they can self-sustain and they don't need Cannon anymore, and they have still got this kind of good base of personnel that Penske are providing through the Alliance, and all these young engineers that are kind of being blooded maybe to go on to Penske in the future. So yeah, maybe they will be all right. You know, they've got an excellent young driver lineup for next year in Ferrucci and Malukas. But only time will really tell how reliant they may have been on Cannon. And it's clear what the paddock felt, isn't it? Because, I mean, I think it's going back to the month of May when Colson Herta said that it was a cheap way for Penske to hire Michael Cannon via the Foyt Alliance. So he's clearly very highly regarded. So it will be a loss. Just remains to be seen whether Foyt can kind of preserve what Cannon has built.
We spoke about this test at the Thermal Club for the last couple of weeks, and now the test has taken place. So just remind you, it's Felipe Nasr for Team Penske, Logan Sargeant for Meyer Shank Racing, Louis Foster for Ray Robb Lanigan Racing, Toby Sowery for Dale Coyne Racing, Hunter McElrea for Ed Carpenter Racing, and Enzo Fittipaldi for Arrow McLaren. Nasr ended the test top as testing, so the standard, do not read too much into this test because it doesn't mean much. And Louis Foster will speak about it in just a minute's time, but there was a lot of different programs going on. Sargeant and Fittipaldi, for example, more evaluations. Nasr was sort of there to collect data for Penske. Louis, as I touched on in a minute, was sort of there to get experience of long run and tyre saving and fuel saving, that sort of thing. But Nasr was top of the test, just over a tenth ahead of McElrea. Then Sargeant was third in the final test, followed by Foster, Fittipaldi, and then Sowery, who had a terminal engine problem in the morning, so he only got 27 laps, which is a bit of a shame for Toby Sowery, because there's a good chance to show everybody, or show the team that he deserves a seat in 2025, but that wasn't to be. But it's always slightly interesting to see who's testing and who goes fastest or whatever. It doesn't really mean anything, but it's always good to have a look, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can never get carried away by time shots, but we always have a look anyway, don't we? I mean, I think Racer reported that Nasr's kind of fastest lap did come in the best conditions of the day, quite late on. It was a bit cooler, while others were maybe not on their performance runs as such. But still, I think it kind of outlines again, it's a shame that he's not got a chance to actually race in IndyCar, because he feels like someone who would have been really, really competitive, or at least could have been really competitive. I think Sargeant obviously was the headline from that test. The fact that he was third on the overall charts is encouraging, because you've seen F1 drivers come over and test before and just have not gelled with the car at all. And it really feels like Sargeant, he logged 84 laps as per Racer. So that is a very productive day, and there was some onboard footage as well. And he did look pretty comfortable. He was atop the time charts for a little bit during the day. So yeah, that was cool. I guess that does, well, I don't know. We'll see how he looks at things, but it could maybe open up an opportunity in the future for him. And again, we saw how much things can change even in the season this year. So who knows if there may be an opening for him during the year, possibly. So that's one to keep an eye on. You do feel for Sauer only getting 27 laps because teams, I mean, these days are really important, especially for a team like Coin who, for instance, you look at your Penske's, your Ganassis who got all the hybrid testing last year. Test days are fewer and further between for the likes of Coin and these lesser outfits. So that was disappointing, especially for Sauer as well. They've obviously all travelled over to California for this test. So that's a shame. And also Enzo Fittipaldi having an issue at some point as well. So yeah, should we hand it over to Louis Foster?
Yeah, I was about to say, that's enough of us speaking to the test. Let's have you listen to somebody who wasn't at the test and driving at test. Here's Louis Foster on his day at the Thermal Club. So one of the drivers at this thermal test was Louis Foster, who joins us now. And I guess first of all, how does the test go? How did the day progress with all your various activities and your first sort of official outing for the team?
Yeah, it was a good day. Obviously, we had a lot of we had a very different run plan to a lot of the other drivers there. A lot of the drivers there were eval drivers and they weren't signed or had other things they were doing, like IMSA drivers. There was a lot of a mix of drivers there. So we did a lot of running in the sense that we were practicing for me to race, right? So we did a lot of fuel saving. We did a lot of tire saving, just those kind of things. So we had quite a different run plan to everyone. But it was a good day. We learned a lot of the team. We definitely faced some issues with the balance. I think the team would be the first to admit that we weren't quite in the window where we wanted to be. But no, I mean, we did a lot of laps. I was quite tired by the end of it, but I enjoyed it. It was also my first time out properly in an IndyCar, like with a team with an end goal, and that's what I really enjoy is the ability to go out there and have a target and know what we want to do and where we want to be, and that's what I enjoy about it. So no, it was fun. And again, the car's not too dissimilar from the Indy Lights car. So kind of you get in and it's like take a few laps to kind of get a feel for where you are, and then you can go. It's quite a once you've driven lights, I think it's quite a easy car to step into and get used to quickly.
Obviously, as well, it's been over a year since you've been out in the IndyCar. Any kind of things you thought were big challenges or any kind of big lessons you feel you've taken away from this now to kind of just work on, delve into over kind of the coming months?
Honestly, not a ton. Nothing really surprised me, I wouldn't say. I think everything that was new, like I said, fuel saving and the hybrid system, for example, obviously didn't drive that before when I did the IndyCar test with Andretti. Definitely new things and still need to get my head around it a bit more and kind of learn it more. But no, I think the base that we hit, I think the place we ended up, I think as a team, we were quite happy with it, and we can see a great stepping stone forward from that. Both for myself and as a team. Obviously, there's little bits here and there in the data. I can brake a bit harder, brake a bit later, get on power, like those small things, which will just come with a bit more time in the car. But I think nothing monumental. Just kind of do your job.
And how did you find the hybrid as well?
Honestly, not too weird. It's weird in the sense that, so for example, with Formula One, right, you've got your hybrid, they've got their version of hybrid, right, which isn't a button, it's their modes, right? But they obviously have to regen it a lot themselves. So they do have to figure out when to regen, how to regen, how much to regen, because they need to do that as a driver, right? Whereas in the IndyCar, you kind of don't need to worry about the regen, at least from what I understand. It regens obviously off throttled and on braking automatically, but you usually regen, or the team will adjust the amount of regen based on how much deployment you have a lap. So you never really have to drive differently to regen more or less. You kind of just drive the same every lap with it. The only difficult thing is obviously just making sure you get the right percentage of deployment at each corner that the team wants. Usually you've got about 2 to 4 deployment zones on a lap. But again, it's not too dissimilar from the push-to-pass system in the sense that when you're going for a hot lap in the race, you'll have deployment zones of push-to-pass that's most optimal. So it's kind of the same. So I think you'll find that on lap time critical laps in the race, i.e. before and after pit stops, you'll be going out of corners sometimes with both buttons on trying to get the maximum amount of speed up as possible, and the biggest delta with the shortest amount of push to pass and hybrid usage. So yeah, not a ton. It definitely adds something to the straight. Usually on a straight, you can kind of sit there and chill. And with this car, because you're going through so many gears and you're pulling hybrid and other stuff going on, the straights are now actually kind of busy. But no, honestly, not a huge, difficult thing to get your head around.
I believe this is your first time at Thermal. So what was your sort of impressions of the facility, I guess, the track as a venue to drive on in preparation of racing on it next year?
Funnily enough, it's not my first time at Thermal. I went there. I have friends that live in the area, and I went there maybe 2 years ago or so. We weren't supposed to be there. We got kicked out in the end, but it's a really cool facility, and the track's really cool. It's very different. Obviously, like there's so little runoff. You're driving by houses, so it's very different. But no, it's a cool track. I mean, it's got two very distinct sections to it, like a fast section and a slow section, right? But no, I enjoyed it, and I think hopefully it will give some good racing. There's quite a lot of combination corners, which does make it difficult to pass for sure. So we'll see how that plays out in the race. But there's some decently long straights where you can get a good slipstream and try and get past people. So we'll see how it is with that many cars on the track. I think it'll be quite hectic. And
then would you liken it to any other road course on the calendar?
Not really. It's very different. It's a lot of the tracks that we have tend to be either like big start-stoppy tracks or big flowy tracks. So flowy ones being like Barber and Mid-Ohio, and then kind of more stoppy-starty tracks, I guess you could call it, being like IMS. So it merges those together a little bit in a way. But it's definitely difficult to set up the car just because you've got so many different types of corners that you've got to worry about. You know, you've got really high-speed, high-committing corners, and then you've also got 3 really slow hairpins. So it's quite hard to kind of figure out the balance and what's optimal for that track.
I think we last caught up with you about 24 hours after you were announced at RLL. So just how has the last month kind of gone in general? What sort of stuff have you been up to, just bedding into the team?
Yeah, I mean, just general stuff, really. Obviously, now having our first test, behind us, that's, we've kind of progressed as a team a lot there, and understanding of each other's improved a lot. But, mainly just smaller things, media stuff with the team, being in the shop to do seat fits and pit stop practices, just generally trying to be around and get to know people and trying to settle myself in there. But no, it's been pretty smooth sailing. Everyone there's really nice guys. Getting to know them more and more and more. Obviously, a lot of names to remember, so I'm kind of still want people to wear name tags. That'd be helpful for me. But yeah, no, it's been good so far, and yeah, we're looking forward to what's to come.
And is there any more testing kind of planned in the near future? Are you planning to get out on an oval at some point during the off season as well?
Yeah, so I think we've got one more test planned for Tuesday next week. As in like in 9 days, whatever it is. That'll be at Laguna Seca, and then that'll be it for this year. And then we'll have a few more tests next year. I think we've got another rookie test for myself at Sebring, then the series test at Sebring, and then I'll do my super speedway test most likely at Nashville at some point in like March.
So in this IndyCar off season, I know it's a very tough period, but our friends at Formula Model Shop are making it slightly better because they've got a little promotion at the minute to get 12% off any 2024 IndyCar models in the Formula Model Shop store right now. You can find all the details on their website, but a nice little deal going on there right now. And it, of course, is the best place to get your IndyCar merchandise in the United Kingdom and, of course, the rest of our European listeners.
You can use the discount code 5BOMB, or one word, FIVEBOMB, to gain 5% off products on the FMS site. Visit the highlights on the DIVEBOMB Motorsport Instagram account for a link to an exclusive VIP section on the FMS store, courtesy of DIVEBOMB.
And you can visit the DIVEBOMB website, which gives you the link to the Formula Model Shop website via the pink banner on our homepage, or you can head to formulamodelshop.co.uk.
Stay tuned for exclusive giveaways, events, and other content.
Well, I was thinking about this today. We are about halfway until next year's Indianapolis 500.
Yes. It's been about 6 months, hasn't it? It did strike me that
it's okay. Let's search it up. Days until May 25th. We have 182 days, so we are just under halfway.
And we're a day shy of it being 6 months exactly.
Yes. And with that, there's been some news.
Sorry. By the time the episode goes live, we will be inside 6 months.
Yes.
So we're recording on Sunday.
And just some news ahead of that already, some very early news. We've had the honorary pace car driver announced. His name is Michael Strahan, who's an NFL legend and an NFL and Fox analysis. So this was announced in Fox's pre-show to some NFL game. So obviously the Fox influence, great there again. They're heavily promoting the 500 in front of a big NFL audience. So that is fantastic. And we have our pace car driver announced. Again, doesn't really mean anything usually, but good promotion for Fox. So well done, Fox.
Yeah, I mean, this is a Super Bowl champion, a Pro Football Hall of Famer. So this is a significant personality, a prominent part of the NFL on Fox kind of analyst panel, I guess you could put it, for the NFL. So yeah, that was cool. That was cool. The fact that they did it as well on it was the pre-game show. I think it was actually for the Colts against the Lions. So yeah, that's pretty cool because this is a show that, well, reportedly, I don't see the figures, but supposedly it can be over 20 million people watching. So that is huge numbers being introduced to IndyCar because let's be frank, are there even 20 million IndyCar fans? Possibly not.
No chance.
So there's clearly huge emphasis and kind of budget already being put into coverage, into promotion. Okay, a lot of it's been Indy 500 centric at the moment, and maybe that's okay because that's something people would have heard. I hope that kind of as we get closer to St. Pete that we can have a showcase of the entire season, because I think that's one thing that Fox needs to break, is that IndyCar is not just the Indy 500. IndyCar is a 17-race season, which a lot of people don't know. But also cool on that pre-game show, for the Sunday games, you had Will Power's new livery revealed. It was a striking new Verizon livery in shell-like colours, mostly red and white with kind of a bit of a yellow streak on there. So the fact that was also done on this pre-game show, yeah, very impressive. Very impressive.
Over time, as liveries come announced, we'll do like a tier list of all different liveries that get announced over time on the podcast. So stay tuned for that.
That's not going to beat him for me.
I'm not a huge fan.
Really? So, I really like it.
We will see. But yeah, we'll do a tier list over time with the liveries as they come out. But this was the first one, so we'll give it a bit of time. Minor news, which there's no discussion, but you need to know. Kramer have announced their numbers. Schwartzman's in the 83, Ilot's in the 90. So there's nothing really to talk about there, but there's their numbers for next year. One cool thing was that Yuki Tsunoda, I think, tested an IndyCar. Wasn't really a test; he did a show running in an IndyCar.
I think it was from some Honda commercial.
It was a Honda promotion, so it wasn't a test or anything. It was just some experience. Guided by Scott Dixon. So it was actually Pelot's title-winning car was obviously rewrapped into a Honda livery, but Tsunoda drove it around one of the Las Vegas Motor Speedway road courses. So there's a couple like drone shots and cool camera angles and that sort of thing. It honestly isn't, I can't really tell you too much about it, but it was pretty cool. Scott Dixon was there, as well as our one non-championship time IndyCar driver, Colin Brown, although he was there for the Acura more than for anything else in the GTP. But Tsunoda got an opportunity to drive an IndyCar, which was pretty cool. And again, it's one of these small things, but it's not big, but maybe somebody might notice, oh, he's driving an IndyCar. This is pretty cool. And Tsunoda sort of said he had a vague ambition to drive an IndyCar in the future. So maybe that's a face to watch out for our 2029 good predictions or whatever in a few years.
And we know the attention that there is in Japan as well from Takuma Sato. So I'm sure there would be a lot of partners willing to make that happen. Maybe now that Monaco and the Indy 500 no longer clash. That's a bit of news we have had in the last week or so. We got a cool picture from that event of Scott Dixon with Max Verstappen, two of the greatest that we've ever seen, really. I think they had not met before. So that was quite cool. We've had a few IndyCar and F1 crossovers, actually. Colton Herta and Connor Daly played golf with Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz before the Las Vegas event. And Connor Daly, I think, was actually working on the at-track commentary in Vegas as well. So, or at least on kind of the team that I think that's shown on the tracks around the screens around the track. So yeah, some nice IndyCar and F1 crossovers. Let's just keep shoving IndyCar in the faces of F1 fans and steal some of them.
Off-seasoning content 101 is what I call that. So I think that's the end of our random off-seasoning content for the minute. But what I will do is, as I said, I've got a little segment. So this week I did a little research. The NASCAR Cup Series playoff format is obviously heavily criticised, just sort of the whole way it works. I was intrigued. What happens if you do it with IndyCar for 2024? So I run over it, but put it this way: Gavin Ward would still be at McLaren if IndyCar used the NASCAR playoff format. So that's what you need to know. But I've run through it for you because I thought it was pretty interesting. I did it for 2024. I've done it for 2023 as well. But we'll focus on 2024 for this week. If you enjoy it, we might do a bit more. So I like NASCAR. I've gone straight to round of 12. Otherwise, it'd be a bit ridiculous. So that means we only need 3 races for the round of 12. We only need 3 races for the round of 8. And then we have our Championship 4 race in Nashville. So the regular season ends after Iowa. If you didn't know how the NASCAR point system works or playoff systems, if you win a race, let's say in IndyCar's case, the first 10 wins of the season, the people who win a race, they automatically get locked in. So let's say 6 drivers won a race. It would then be the top 6 on points who would make the playoff 12, basically. You get what's called playoff points if you win a race. And in NASCAR, be for stage points. Obviously, in IndyCar don't have stages, so I've given stage points for a driver who has the most laps led. So they get a playoff point. So you get 5 playoff points if you win, an extra playoff point for most laps led. We'll go to playoff points in a minute, but you also get playoff points for the point standings. So you rounded 12. I'll be honest, it wasn't too special just because it was a top 12 in the standings. But at that point, after the 10th race, which was Iowa race 1, the playoff 12 are as follows: Palou, O'Ward, Power, Dixon, McLaughlin, Herter, Kirkwood, Rossi, Newgarden, Rosenqvist, Ericsson, and Ferrucci. So no surprises there. At this point, everyone's points reset basically to 2,000. And everyone else can no longer win the championship. So, for example, Graham Rahal can no longer win the championship because he's not in the playoffs. Now, what you get here is, depending on how they've done in the regular season, so the first 10 races, they will get bonus points. So, as I said, you get 5 bonus points if you won a race. You get an extra bonus point if you had the most laps left. And depending on where you were in the standings after the first 10 races, you get more what's called playoff points. So, I won't bore you with it. But put it this way, Palou would have led the standings ahead of O'Ward, McLaughlin, Dixon, Power, Newgarden, Herter, and Kirkwood. And in the relegation zone are Rossi, Rosenqvist, Ericsson, and Ferrucci. Now, at this point, if you win a race, you automatically go through into the next round. And then the rest are decided on points on how you do over those 3 races. Obviously, some already have an advantage over others. There weren't too many shocks here. Power won Iowa 2. Herter won Gateway. Herter won Toronto, and Newgarden won Gateway. So they were all automatically through. And the rest who went through on points were Palou, McLaughlin, Dixon, Kirkwood, and O'Ward. So Ferrucci, Rosenqvist, Rossi, and Ericsson were all eliminated. I wouldn't say there was any 2 real surprises in that case. So, yeah, O'Ward scraped through. So he actually came in 2nd, but he actually left the playoffs 8th. So that's noticeable, where he just about scraped it. He was level on points with Kirkwood, but Kirkwood got a better finish in that round. So now we've gone from the 12 to the 8. And again, the points reset and they get their original playoff points again. But if they won a race and led the most laps in the round of 12, they get even more points there. So entering Portland, which is the round of 8 round, you have Palou, O'Ward, McLaughlin, and Dixon. But the cut line, Dixon was actually level with Power. But Power, Newgarden, Herter, and Kirkwood were in the provisional relegation zone. But this round was crazy. Okay. So Power won Portland, so that locked him through into the Championship 4. O'Ward won Milwaukee 2. That locked him into the Championship 4. And then McLaughlin won Milwaukee. O'Ward won Milwaukee 1. McLaughlin won Milwaukee 2. So that put him through to Championship 4. So there's only 1 space on points. And that was obviously going to be Alex Palou because he had such a big points buffer already, as well as good finishes in Portland and Milwaukee 2. So that left Herter eliminated, that left Dixon eliminated, that left Kirkwood eliminated, that left Newgarden eliminated. Newgarden had a really bad stretch of races because he had the 2 27ths in Milwaukee, so this really hampered him at this point. So we head into the Championship 4 of O'Ward, McLaughlin, Power, and Palou. If you didn't know, points completely reset, and it's basically whoever finishes the top out of these 4 drivers. That happened to be Pato O'Ward because he finished 2nd in Nashville, McLaughlin 5th, Palou 11th, and Power 24th. So if you're ever intrigued, if IndyCar used the NASCAR playoff system, Pato O'Ward would be your 2024 champion, believe it or not. So as I said, Ward would still have a job.
Yeah, I mean, we're not a NASCAR podcast to go ranting about the NASCAR format, but I think it says a lot that the guy who finished second in points was eliminated. Eliminated before the final. Did Power make the final for?
Power made the final because he won Milwaukee.
But the guy
Portland.
The guy who actually was the second best driver didn't even make it into the final, and the guy who finished fifth in the standings won. And that's nowhere near as bad as NASCAR.
I mean, O'Ward was very lucky because he scraped through the first round. The next round, he basically only got through because he won at Milwaukee. And then he just happened to finish the best at Nashville because he was a different strategy.
It just goes to show, all it takes is having a good end to the season or a good one race or so, and you can win the championship.
Exactly. So that was a really interesting experiment. For 2023, I won't spoil it too much. Well, I will spoil it. Dixon won it. So I still haven't watched that 2021, but Palou might be with the playoff system, a 0-time IndyCar champion. So I don't know how far back I'll go, but it's quite an interesting experiment. Yeah, O'Ward, Palou, and McLaughlin have made the championship four in both years, interestingly. So that's a little stat for you. But yeah, that's it. I'll leave playoffs for this week before I confuse you even more. Hopefully I'll explain that clear enough, but it's not the most simple motorsport format in the world. So we'll end it there. But we will bring it on to, I guess, our history for this week.
So the 50s are actually regarded by many as the golden era for the Indy 500. IMS was under new ownership of Tony Hulman Jr., who kind of invested a lot in improving the facility. It was during the 50s that came the Roadster era, which had the engine to the left side of the chassis, which meant the drivers, which kind of nowadays just seems bizarre to think about, actually sat to one side of the car. They were on the right to kind of allow a balanced weight distribution. The legendary Bill Vukovic won back-to-back 500s in 1953 and 54, before he was actually tragically killed in the 1955 race. But those two wins that he took were actually by a combined total of nearly 5 minutes, which again, even at this point, you're looking, 40-odd years into the Indy 500 being run, you are still getting dominant wins. And actually the 53 and 54 editions are both known for their extreme heat, to the extent the 11th place finisher in 1954 used 5 relief drivers, which I didn't even know was something that was possible. But between 1952 and 1955, actually, Bill Vukovic led 75% of the laps, which shows just what a legend of the speedway he was. But yeah, there are some incredibly kind of storied tales from this period. I have specifically gone for 1951, just for the sheer adversity that the winner faced. So the victor was called Lee Wallard. He was 41 years old, and he was a former bulldozer operator. His car was actually a dirt track style car, because dirt racing at this point was quite popular, which was, in the Indy 500, quite an uncomfortable ride. But it was to get a lot more uncomfortable for him. He did lead 159 of the 200 laps, including the first and the last, which actually isn't something that happens that often. But how about these things for things he had to weather to win the race? His exhaust pipe came adrift. With 12 laps to go, his brakes failed, and his right rear shock absorber broke. And after the race, he needed medical attention due to the chafing from his fireproof uniform. And during that, he also discovered that he'd shed more than 12 pounds, which is 5.4 kilograms, since breakfast that morning. So the ride was absolutely brutal, regardless of all of the things that happened, whether it's brake failure and right rear shock failing. Yeah, the ride was brutal. The car was failing. His body was deteriorating. But in a race of only 8 finishes, he was the guy who reigned supreme, was Lee Wallard. 25 of the 33 cars were eliminated from this race, and none of them were actually eliminated in an accident of more than one car. So talk about attrition. I mean, we've not even seen a race like that in modern Nashville carnage. That is quite incredible.
Did you know something else about the Indy 500 in this period? Not this specific year, but this period, this decade, I should really say.
You enlighten us.
So this is when the Indy 500 was actually part of the Formula One World Championship.
Yes,
So
I did read that.
For some reason, it was part of the IndyCar as part of the Formula One Championship. So there's actually periods, because it counted towards World Championship points, that people like Fangio would go over, or Giuseppe Verrida would actually go over and participate in the Indy 500 because it counted towards points for the F1 Championship. None of them ever got points, but it was quite a weird system where one race a year, you'd have a complete different field to the rest of the season. So it was quite bizarre in that fact where the Indy 500 was just a completely different event to the rest of the Formula One Championship. And it was just a bit odd that it was included, but hey-oh, it's no longer now. But between 50 and 1950 and 1960, it was included as part of the World Drivers' Championship, which is really weird. So again, in the late 50s, as I said, you had some drivers from Europe, I say Fangio's from Europe, he's from South America, but people like Fangio attempting to qualify in Indy 500 because they wanted points for their F1 attempts. So
that is amazing.
A weird period.
Like, if you were to think of just the modern comparison, and you've got Max Verstappen in the RB20 trying to qualify for the Indy 500, it's alien, isn't it?
Pretty sure the cars use different regulations as well.
Were they?
Really
so that kind of makes it even stranger.
Yeah. I don't know why. I need to do the research into this, but I've known this for a long time. So it's a bit of a weird period.
So I'll update my comparison then. That's like Max Verstappen coming over, driving an Audi McLaren car and getting points towards his Formula One championship.
Pretty much.
Strange.
Yeah. I'd love to see it. Get all the F1 drivers in the Indy 500 and chuck in everyone else.
As I said, there's no longer a clash between Monaco, the Monaco Grand Prix and the Indy 500. So bring it on.
So I'm just on a brief look now. Alberto Ascari raced in 1952. So only time Ferrari have done the Indy 500.
Cool. This is the thing. There's more information now. So there's now more rabbit holes that you don't manage to go down when we're doing the research. That's cool.
Yeah, exactly. So for this week, I actually believe that's all we got time for. So we didn't say it earlier, but I do want to thank Louis Foster again for giving up his time and giving you a bit of insight to his day at the Thermal Club and that test. Obviously, recap that test. Big news week. Pace car driver being announced, Gavin Ward going, Ray Robb signing for Juncos. So lots of different news going on in the past week or so. But hopefully, you've actually caught up on it all now. As we said, the season is approaching. How many days have we got left?
Well, we are inside 100 days, both until cars are first on track in St. Pete and until we race in St. Pete. So as we record, my whiteboard says 96 days on the Sunday. So by the time this goes live on Tuesday, it will be 94 days. They are rattling away quite quickly. We are well over 2 months since the Nashville finale. So time's going pretty quickly. Off-seasoning is flying by.
We're still going somehow, and hopefully you enjoy the content with it as well, and feel free to share our content if you're enjoying what you're hearing in the off-season. Maybe it'd be a good listen to a friend or somebody who doesn't know too much about IndyCar, and of course any feedback you got for the podcast is always appreciated. And let's try and help grow IndyCar as a series by sharing our content, sharing it to other people who can get invested in IndyCar themselves. But for this week, we thank you very much for watching, and those of you in Spotify, thank you very much for listening, and we hope to see you next time.